This is one of the best fight scenes I've ever seen in an anime, and it shows what seems to be amazing about Moribito, Guardian of the Spirit. It's detailed, creative, and tactful. Look at the backgrounds of these shots. When the camera is more static, the clouds move to add in the motion that's lacking. It helps with a layered effect that adds so much depth to the anime, one hugely in focus with these rice fields it takes place in. 2 or 3 background layers move at different rates, giving it a much more lively and depthy feel than most, and that's with these already absolutely stunning backgrounds, styled ever so slightly like a painting to fit in with the historical base setting without feeling detached from the animation of the characters. And that animation is something. This isn't simulated action, there's no static images with effects, it's full on, you see a strike begin, land, end, and flow into the next one. Like her turning a kick into the momentum for a block, all while the environment around them reacts to their motion. Look at the water naturally ripple because they're engaging with it, or splash up as they hit it. Little details like that make it feel impactful and grounded. And detail means even more than that still. It's also in what they choose to emphasize. In all these extended shots of carefully choreographed fights, there are very few close-ups, with most of them being the head of her spear, which is held together by this string. As they trade blows, it naturally begins to take some damage, slowly unraveling the whole time. It adds a layer of tension to the scene that really helps it along. We know that she is stronger than they are, but it's an element which could swing things in their favor, liable to happen at any moment. But detail means even more than that still, it's also in the context. For this fight, it's that Prince Chagam here is fleeing his home city with Balsa, his newly hired bodyguard. A pairing of someone fresh to the everyday world and someone who's basically conquered it, there's going to be moments where this shows, even if Chagam does sit well outside of the usual fish out of water trope you'd get with this kind of plot, never whining about this uncomfortable experience. But he obviously doesn't know how to run away from pursuers like a veteran combatant would, and they show this in the framing of the fight. When it begins, Balsa tells him to run, detaches his pack, and draws the attention of all 4 pursuers because a one-on-one fight would result in one of them dying for certain at her skill level. She pulls the fight perpendicular to the path into the forest so that they're not gaining on him as he flees, begins to flee herself, but then stops her own sprint into the woods when she notices that Chagam has stopped far too short, halting the advance of her foes by standing strong once more. This sequence highlights these skills on both sides. The entire course of the fight and how it plays out is dictated by their winning conditions. Balsa needs to stall their advance as the prince flees, while they simply need to injure her. That's because they're expert trackers who know that their best advantage isn't speed, but strategy. Wound or panic your foe, and you can follow the obvious trail as they exhaust themselves fleeing instead of outright fighting a stronger enemy. That's why they can all gang up on her as well, and why when she finally takes a blow, they can deal another cheap strike and then regroup and replan. They already did what they needed, the rest will play out. This accomplishes something amazing, which is that this fight doesn't rely on contrivance or luck. It doesn't end because of some interference or random happening, but because it makes sense for it to end. One side did all they needed to. That's why I began this impression by highlighting that action scene. It showcases what felt like would be the core aspects of the series, and the best way I could show that is that this fight scene takes place at the start of episode 3. That means Moribito isn't going to be an in-your-face go-go-go series. It has great action, but those moments are well-developed exclamation points on long, slow sentences, which makes sense with its origins as a novel adaptation, not a manga adaptation, written by author Nahoko Uehashi beginning in 1996. It's not paced for a quick read each week, but rather for satisfying arcs. You pick it up for an hour or two, get to a satisfying point, and then come back the next time you can, like a novel. Its pull is going to be in getting you into its world and characters. Moribito is historically framed with mystical elements. There's demonic possessions, star readers, spells determined by written characters, its own unique monetary system, different terms, and so on. A lot of world building like that. It takes time aside to add depth to these aspects with a dedicated 7-minute scene in episode 2 going to 2 of these star readers explaining the current happenings, including the fantasy elements, the more intricate political thriller details of the plot, the relations of the characters, and their own motivations. It is a slow experience in the best way. It takes time away to explain why Balsa can't spend the royal gems she's paid in. It would give away the position because of the obvious royal markings. They don't have a horse for this journey because all the money they spent on supplies at once drew the attention of those tracking her down, so they had to leave without one. The struggles of their journey make sense rather than being exposition pulled out of thin air. You'll see this in any number of series. Gurren Lagann, for an example, in episode 5 starts off with them starving despite the logistics of travel never being mentioned until then. But Moribito makes it a point for them to buy food and then lose it in escaping, meaning if we get that development, it has a backing in what we've seen. These slow, careful touches make it a very grounded and engrossing experience where every development makes sense and feels deserved. While it was quite low-key for most of the just under an hour I watched, I was feeling like part of this world and wanted to keep watching more to escape into a fleshed out and interesting world. I don't know if there's anything in here that I'd analyze though. So far the characters have been quite upfront and declarative of their motivations, and this includes anything related to the themes, from the queen directly telling the prince, "Don't hate your father for trying to kill you, after all, he's under a lot of pressure and made the call he was forced to, not what he wanted to," as well as how it has Balsa just shout her motivations. She once took 8 lives, so now she's committed herself to saving 8 to make up for that fact, with Shagum being the final one. But this direct nature isn't awful because it slots in well with her easy to understand personality. Balsa is a bodyguard. The most effective way for her to be is somewhat cold but not quite distant, paying more attention to the surroundings and acting very carefully over courtesy and formality. Not to say she can't do those things. She does the song and dance of meeting royalty right on script, but only as long as the context calls for it. Once the action begins, she's into work mode. Right away we get a sense of duty and responsibility that will no doubt influence her interplay with Shagum. While he is a spoiled prince, he doesn't show it. He raises no objections to the new harsh conditions he's in, making it a more interesting royalty in a new world story than usual. These slight adjustments to the formula kept me wondering how their interactions will go as they're forced to bond on a long journey. Will he break at some point? Why can he hold out like this? Will Balsa begin to show a care more than just duty? And how will this weaken the strength of her mercenary personality? There are enough naturally rising questions to fit with the point of the series, the bonds between strangers and how they grow, to keep me invested. Of course, there's more than that. Shagum is possessed by a to the story and origins of this nation and its current government, tying these central mysteries all together. His father had to try and kill him because only someone blessed by God can slay this kind of spirit, and the royalty here are, of course, blessed. This idea is expressed in a few ways, most notably how the commoners can't look royalty in the eyes or else they'll go entirely blind upon doing so. There's lots of little mystical elements like that, but are they actually mystical? Balsa accidentally makes eye contact with the queen before realizing that, looking away and then looking back because she was fine. So is she simply to resist, blessed by the god as well, or are some of these mystical elements the deceit of dark forces behind the scenes? It could go in a very from the New World direction, where a fantastical setting is revealed to have quite dark and twisted origins. I feel anyone who liked that series will probably get into Moribito as well, because they felt very similar from this impression. So let's do a quick recap of the feel and technical elements, a quick plot summary, and that'll be this backwards ass formatted impressions video. Super detailed and pretty backgrounds, a couple of uses of 3D motion in each episode to highlight these beautiful elements, and a super vivid world made through little details and lots of motion, like these background characters who all move, where most series would utilize static images. Good job, Production I.G. It looks fantastic. With that said though, there are still some pretty static conversation scenes which carry on for up to 1/3 of an episode in some cases. And while the CG isn't very overt for 2007, you can tell that's when it's from, especially with this water. I don't know why this one section looks so terrible when the rest was average at worst. Little details and careful developments help to ground the world and have each plot point feel worthwhile and earned, drawing you into a world with custom mystical flourishes, which may come into question or reveal hidden origins. There's likely to be some political intrigue playing out as Balsa and Shagum flee, themselves playing the opposite side of widespread conspiracy by coming close together as strangers from two opposite worlds, but avoiding the usual tropes of such a setup. So far, they themselves are developed in quite direct statements, but this lays a baseline to be expanded upon later and a foundation with enough interesting possibilities to leave you wanting more. Now to the plot. Returning to a town she's been to before to get her spear fixed, Balsa witnesses one of the veiled assassination attempts on the prince's life, jumping to action to save him, even after just saying that as an outsider, she owes nothing to the royalty here and refuses to bow. The queen later has her tracked down and given a reward stay at the palace, solace for this, an excuse for a midnight meeting about the situation. She explains that the king has to have the prince killed due to his possession by a water spirit, which Balsa witnessed while saving him as he unconsciously protected them in the river. The queen asks the somewhat legendary bodyguard to ensure the prince would escape and live instead, however. Forced to action since she would be killed rather than allowed to leave with this knowledge, Balsa proves she could have escaped, but then accepts the task anyway to fulfill her goal of saving 8 lives to make up for the 8 she took years prior, her whole reason for acting as a bodyguard. The two escape, setting a fire to cover their tracks, but after planning a careful trek across the mountains and purchasing supplies, are shortly tracked down by elite secret soldiers who wound Balsa, capture the prince, and force them to lose all their preparations, setting the stage for a harsh journey where two strangers are forced to grow close to survive. And that's 2 episodes and a bit of the third of Moribito, Guardian of the Spirit. Overall, my impression is that it's worth a watch if you want a slow, engrossing experience into a somewhat historically mystical world, complemented with superb action scenes and stunning scenery, starring a strong, adult female lead who so far hasn't been sexualized at all and stands out through her own strengths and sure to be complicated past and motivations. In a medium full of first-year students and overt fan service, it's an amazingly refreshing lead created by a celebrated fantasy author in Japan. Part of the novel was also adapted into English, if that's more your speed for this one. And that's my impression of the series. If you've seen it, feel free to leave some extra detail down below and let me know what I got right or wrong. Let me know if you're planning to watch it, and of course drop any suggestions down below because this was one I found from a suggestion on the last one. But as always, thank you for watching, and I hope I'll see you again soon.